Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we will be returning to the discussion about the UK's vital mobile telecommunications network. Having dipped a toe into this critical sector of the infrastructure market in episode 19 with Belinda Fawcett of Cornerstone, and do check that out, we are back on the subject by what can only be described as popular demand. As I discussed in May, having high-speed internet connectivity beaming into our devices at all times is now considered something of, well, close to a human right. Any darkness of service ranges from being hugely annoying to, well, frankly, business critical. So alongside our physical transport systems, ensuring that we have comprehensive 4G and increasingly now 5G coverage is without doubt key to creating the connectivity needed to accelerate growth and boost our quality of life across the UK. And there is some good news. The National Infrastructure Commission has already praised the progress being made over the sector. 4G coverage now extends to around 92% of the UK landmass, and the Shared Rural Network Agreement should increase this to 95% by the end of 2025. And progress is also being made on the faster 5G rollout, with coverage now at around 70% and growing. But we are by no means there yet. Dark areas still do exist. Coverage on trains is haphazard, and many rural areas simply have no connection at all. Yet, as the government's latest wireless infrastructure strategy explains, hooking up the UK's 5G network could actually deliver productivity benefits, well, close to 159 billion by 2035. So a big prize. So let's talk about these challenges and, of course, the successes. So therefore, it's my pleasure to welcome Gareth Elliott, Director of Policy and Communications at Mobile UK, which is the organisation representing the major telephone companies behind the services that hold the key to all of our lives, and of course to whom we all pay probably a monthly subscription. Gareth, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thank you, Anthony. I'm a pleasure to be here.
Well, let's crack straight on, Gareth. I mean, I quoted a few ambitions and figures and I suppose try to summarise where we are as a nation when it comes to mobile connectivity. I mean, is it a success story, or are we still struggling?
Well, I would say it is a success story. The mobile industry has come from sort of 1G, 2G, 3G, 5G. We're now talking about 5G standalone, and 6G is coming along the line. And just, you mentioned some of those big projects there. I mean, we've got the Shared Rural Network, which is a £1 billion initiative to extend 4G mobile coverage to 95% of the UK's landmass. We're deploying 5G networks at speed in our towns and cities at the moment. Two operators have already met the 50% of the UK population milestone, and we are working towards a government ambition to provide 5G standalone to the majority of populated areas by 2030. So there's a lot going on, but this doesn't happen overnight. You know, we have to build this physical infrastructure on the ground for people to then receive it both in their mobiles, but equally also in the Internet of Things and machine to machine. And I think we're at a paradigm shift at the moment where we are moving from the mobile being the predominant connected device to actually machines and that sort of sensors and everything else, the Internet of Things as we call it.
Okay, well, speaking personally, you know, I've spent literally hours on the phone to my mobile provider this week. I can't get a signal anywhere near my house due to a problem with their infrastructure. I don't know. Yet my wife gets perfect reception via a different network provider. I mean, why is the coverage so dependent on who you pay?
Well, I think that's a good point. I mean, we must remember that the mobile industry is a competitive industry, and mobile operators compete on their differing network coverage. So I would always say, check before you buy. Don't buy just because you like the phone. Check the coverage in your area. But as I say, things like the Shared Rural Network are extending mobile coverage, and it is a shared network with all operators to extend all 4 coverage across more and more areas of the UK, and in areas where actually at the moment there is no infrastructure at all. So it's a big project, and there's a lot of challenging things to do with that.
So what you're saying, Gareth, is that my wife is a savvy consumer and I just have a complete mug and bought the wrong one.
I wouldn't say anything like that.
A few technical questions then. I mean, humour my ignorance. 4G is slower, but it's better over long distances. 5G is faster, but it only works over short distances, so needs more infrastructure. I mean, is that correct in basic terms? You know, I mean, if so, you know, where is the major challenge now when it comes to removing these dark spots?
So I'd love to say it's as simple as that, and it never is. I mean, the Gs, as we call them, are what we call the generational technologies. You had 1G, which was sort of analog and voice. 2G brought about data and text messaging. 3G brought about sort of the early stages of the internet, and 4G today is what you have as the major mobile internet. 4G and and 5G, very, very, sophisticated technologies. 5G is being touted as sort of the newest and shiniest, and it certainly has some amazing characteristics. Low latency, sort of faster than the human brain can think about, much faster, up to gigabit and more connectivity. But, equally, we work on radio waves, and we have, so if you think about a radio as you have your sort of long wave radios, which you can get sort of from the continent radios over here, they travel over long distances. That's like your 700 and 800 megahertz bands, which we have both uses in 4G and 5G. And then you have your very high frequency, which is very sort of travels a shorter distance, but very much high capacity. So 5G very much is being built in the networks at the moment to add capacity into the networks, but it equally will have a role in the rural areas as well, as we look at those additional spectrum bands, which are recently been released by Ofcom. So it's not quite as simple as that. It's very sort of dependent on which bands and frequencies we use and how we use them, but the operators are working towards all of those to provide that service and that coverage and everything we expect.
Okay, well, you'll be pleased to know that I've just been issued with a new 5G SIM. All I need now is a 5G phone, so I'll be, I'm catching up. I'm getting there.
You're getting there.
You mentioned the shared rural network. I mean, just exactly what is that? How would you describe that, and why is it going to help?
Well, simply put, it is about extending coverage into rural areas. But what's chief among it is that shared nature. This is about operators sharing the passive infrastructure. And what I mean by that is the masts and the poles that are out there. So it is about extending coverage of all four into rural areas. There's two elements of this. There's the partial hotspot element, where there is coverage by one or more operator, and all four joining together to bring that coverage so that every one of them has that coverage. And then there's the total not spot element, which is where the public funding comes in, and that is about building infrastructure in areas where there is no infrastructure. Think of sort of areas of Scotland, very very sort of wilderness, and again topographically challenging, and it's not economically manageable for the operators, and hence we are working with the government in a public-private initiative.
So it's just a way of kind of piggybacking on the similar bits of infrastructure just to reduce the cost. One last techie question. I hear that 2G and 3G is now about to be switched off. I mean, does that mean potentially that there's going to be even less coverage for some?
No, not at all. And I think that's one of the big commitments of what's been called the 2G, 3G retirement. So all MNOs, the mobile network operators, have a commitment to the government to repurpose or refarm spectrum used by 2G and 3G technologies to 4G and 5G technologies by 2033. The best way to think of it, something that's been called a switch off, but I would rather say it's a retirement or a repurposing of that spectrum. And as I say, the best way to think about it is when we turn the analog TV signal into the digital TV signal. And that is happening at pace. But equally, there's a lot of other reasons for this. The 4G and 5G are much more efficient. 5G is 10 times more efficient than 3G. And just as an example, EE's network 3G usage accounts for less than 0.6 of all downloaded UK data and just 7% of traffic. Yet it accounts for 35% of their power usage. So moving on to these more efficient networks helps with both power usage, it's a better service, and it's a better quality. But as I say, equally, it's a phased retirement. So we are working with all our customers to ensure that where they are impacted, they are moved on to the new sort of 4G or 5G technologies.
Brilliant. I feel substantially more educated now in the mobile world, Gareth. Thanks a lot. Now, you just produced a report called Exclusion to Inclusion. I suppose it begs the question, what is Mobile UK's role in really accelerating the UK's connected future?
Well, digital exclusion is a really concerning thing, because as everything moves online, I mean, from your grocery shopping to your council services to paying tax and getting your tax for your car on the roads, it's all being done online. And if you don't have that access, you're missing out. And you're missing out on things like job opportunities. I mean, something I read yesterday, for instance, 80% of all job offers are now going online. Equally, it's about loneliness, it's about connecting with your friends and families. But equally, mobile is becoming more and more important, and I don't feel it's yet high up as the policy agenda as it needs to be, especially in this critical debate. So, for instance, 21% of adults access the internet only through a mobile phone. and 1.5 million households only have access at home via a mobile. So we need to ensure that when we talk about inclusion, we have that ability to connect. Now, it's not the only way. Connectivity is not the only way people have digital exclusion. Some people fear the internet or don't have necessarily the confidence to go on, or don't have the affordability is an issue. So I think we need to really look at this from a holistic point. But I'm very keen on this, is that we need to consider this with a mobile aspect as well.
Okay, and I mean, your report, Exclusions to Inclusion, it sets out, obviously this current state of the market, but it also includes 5 recommendations. I mean, perhaps we can talk about those. I mean, the first one, you talk about creating a new digital inclusion strategy. The last government strategy was 2014, and there's currently no central policy ownership. I mean, what do you want and why?
Well, the key point here is that, as going back to it, it's not just connectivity. There are many other aspects of why people are excluded. So this has to be done in partnership. It has to be done. We're looking with charity sectors, we're looking with the industry, and we're looking with local government and national government. Yet what we have is there is no national inclusion strategy that's been updated. I mean, it rarely mentions digital, the previous one. So we need to see from the government leadership on this, and they will help bring us all together to sort of work towards how we can make this better. We as an industry, we're very much working towards extending that coverage, but equally on the ground, it's something I've always tried to make really clear here. If you want that signal, you want that connectivity, we need to have that infrastructure. And again, there's a lot of issues with, for instance, deploying that at a local level.
Do you think that's because the government's tended to sort of hand that over to the private sector to drive that strategy?
For a large extent, we are getting on with that and we are doing that. But there are other issues. For instance, local authorities, they've had a lot of their funding has been taken away from them, and the resources that go into planning are extremely limited. We're finding it, people, it's very difficult the number of applications going in. Often councils are overwhelmed. Having people with the digital skills to enable and collaborate this as a policy across those local authorities, that is a real problem. So I think it's not necessarily, I think we're very much getting on with it, but we need equally those local authorities to be ready for it as well.
Yeah, they need that driving strategy that sits behind it. The second point you say is, you're after enabling investment to ensure connectivity is kept affordable. And I said earlier that the business case for mobile companies to invest is often quite tenuous, particularly in rural areas. I mean, what do you want government to really do about it?
Well, fundamentally, as you mentioned, this is a private industry investing money into this sector, and we need to ensure that the investment environment is positive. Now, the mobile industry is at a very challenging time. It's why we're seeing changes in terms of operators looking to engage with each other. For instance, consolidation. Revenues are flat or declining. We've got that is in itself an issue, but we've got a period where the investment needed to go into the networks, 5G standalone, as we're looking 6G, is huge, and there's a potential investment gap of around 20 to 25 billion pounds at the moment from the amount that the industry would normally invest in, and then about 9 billion, and then that's for full 5G. So we need it to be a positive investment environment, and some of the issues we've raised and we want the government to look at are looking at planning, as I've mentioned already, looking at getting digital champions in at local authorities, looking at net neutrality regulations, for instance, or annual license fees, which essentially are a tax on the industry, which could be used and repurposed into infrastructure investment, and equally balancing the consumer legislation that the government is looking to do it, because you have to have both of those working in the same direction, not one pulling away from the other.
I mean, it is interesting because obviously I've been offered a 5G connectivity, and I don't want to pay really any more for a 5G network because, I, as a consumer, probably think, well, it's fast enough to download what I want to download on 4G. So, there is an interesting kind of trying to find that business model for offering people like me 5G. I mean, does it exist, that business model?
Well, 5G isn't really a premium product. If you have a 5G phone, you will connect with 5G. That most contracts at the moment, they don't differentiate. So, if your phone has that access, it will just get it. And the reason why is because we want people to move on to those more efficient networks. It's about capacity. 5G is very much going in the sort of urban areas at the moment, and this at the start, and that is to build that capacity into the system. It goes back to what I said earlier. Okay. The Internet of Things, billions of devices are coming to connect. We need to have that infrastructure in place.
We'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But the third thing that you talk about, and you touched on it earlier, that with so many people really accessing the internet via their mobile only, your third issue is promoting accessible and mobile-friendly websites as standard. I mean, I hadn't appreciated, but what you're saying is that a lot of businesses actually kind of don't really cater for people who just access via mobile.
Well, as we go back to those statistics, 21 million people, rely on internet access purely through a mobile, and 1.5 million households. If they are accessing key services, and particularly if these are some of the most vulnerable people in society, if that website is then not accessible to their mobile, it becomes very, very difficult. We talked about trust with the elderly. Again, it becomes a minefield for them to go online if they're not comfortable with it. But then if you have a site that then doesn't work around for a tablet or a mobile, this is mobile friendly, then again, they may just give up. And what are they losing because of that accessibility? They could be losing access to those services that they need. They could be losing access to those benefits that they need. Or, again, think of the homeless. The only way they access those services is through a mobile. They don't have a home. They can't access broadband. They don't have a laptop. Yeah. So I think, this is somewhat overlooked. And unfortunately, some of the worst offenders in this are public authorities. It's those essential services. So what we're saying is, if we're looking at mobile and the gambit that it has within this policy agenda, let's make sure that when people access it via those devices, they access it well, and the mobiles websites are built for that.
Which leads to the fourth area, which is using public services to actually promote digital inclusion. And I suppose that kind of goes to the heart of, if you are a local authority, you have to be structuring your information so that you can actually bring people in digitally.
Yeah, well, I've mentioned the elderly, but equally the young, very young, don't tend to rely entirely on their mobiles. And if we're trying to engage with them, again, things like democracy and voting and education, then again, they need to be accessed with devices they use. So it's both that, it's at the elderly, the young, and in between. I think it's often not realised, just how dependent we are on our mobiles now.
So the last thing, of course, you say, UK government should centrally fund digital champions across all local authorities. And I presume, that basically cuts to the heart of it. It's actually getting people in each local authority who are championing the use of mobile telephony.
Well, it was an interesting. I have been a previous councillor myself, so I've seen firsthand how often there's the lack of collaboration between different departments at a local authority level, but also the skills needed to engage with us as an industry, or us as an industry to have a single point of contact. So what we're saying is there should be someone at a local authority level who has both the skills, the seniority, and the ability to coordinate across those departments to bring this together, because mobile isn't a nice to have now. It's not a sort of add-on. It's very much a foundational necessity of all. Think of social care. We talk about big part of the cost of local authorities is keeping people out of hospital and therefore being safe in their homes. And actually monitoring is a big part of that. You think of people falling over now, going the red cord. Well, actually voice activation and monitors that check if you haven't moved, and therefore can notify your patient carers are really important. So what we want is people who understand this, can coordinate that as a policy at that local level. They are senior enough, but also they can engage with us in industry or work through that planning to get that infrastructure deployment as well and help us and assist us in that. So it's very, very important. It's what we're campaigning with a national level.
No, sounds good. I mean, let's talk a bit about you, though, Gareth. I mean, I was going to ask, are you a digital champion? I think you are a digital champion. But you mentioned the fact that you used to be a local councillor in the London Borough of Richmond. And what did you learn about local politics and the challenges of local government when you did that?
Well, I think, again, it's that sort of knowledge and awareness and understanding. One of the things I found that even now, as I feel myself getting into my midlife, in the council, we have a very sort of diverse people who often they have different views on sort of where the new technology is moving, and you need to be educated and brought along in that journey. But equally, we have a planning system which is quite adversarial. It is very much based on who is the one that writes in and says they generally don't want it. And then the councillor will then say, right, okay, I will support you for that objection. But what we're talking about here is infrastructure that the vast majority will either need or will want, and we need to look beyond that. So there's a big part about building awareness within councils, and I think that is something that is still very much important. Why is that infrastructure so necessary? What does it do, and how does it benefit? I mean, just as a quick one, on the jeopardy side of things, if local areas don't have connectivity, your young will move away because they want connectivity. You will then not have access to the ability to inward investment. Factories and people want to move to areas that are connected. Place and space is very, very critical on this now, and I think local authorities, again, going back to that point, it's not a nice to have. We need to have mobile connectivity.
No, but you also know from your experience in local authorities that people generally campaign against things rather than for things. So how do you mobilise a local area or local community to try to demand better communications infrastructure?
Well, let's say it's about bringing awareness and education. And one of the things we've engaged with is something we call the Live Better Connected campaign. And that is about showcasing the benefits of mobile connectivity, but also doing it in a manner that is both educating and challenging people's perceptions. So we do have at the moment a How Connected Am I challenge. And we're asking all people to take this challenge. And what we're finding is that currently it states off, do you have 1 to 4 devices, 5 to 9 devices or more? And 80% of people are saying they have 1 to 9, and 50% of those are saying 1 to 4. But the average at the moment is 15 to 20 devices. The best, Anthony, has been someone who said I have 1 to 4 and ended up with 44 devices.
Well, I'll pop the link for this test in the show notes. But I took the test myself. I said I was 4. It turns out I'm a heavy user. I'm nearer 15. Where are you on the scale?
I was I think 25 plus. So I consider myself I have everything connected in this house. I find it a massive benefit to how things work. But it is that point about challenging people's perceptions, because if you don't necessarily know how connected you are, why then would you think it's a great thing to have a mast or a pole near you? But if you therefore realise that the actual dependence we have on it, like for instance, let's think of an ambulance that's going down the road. It doesn't have a cable hanging out the back. It relies on that mobile connectivity to communicate back with the house, with the household, with the hospital, with the doctor, and it's just changing the mindset. We all look back at some of the former big infrastructure projects and we think, oh no, don't want them. And then today, the things like the Forth Bridge are seen as a national treasure. Maybe we should be looking at mobile similarly.
Well, on that, I'll have to mention that your background is in communications, and before you joined Mobile UK, you were head of government affairs, taking the HS2 project through Parliament. I mean, how much do you miss the HS2 and working at the HS2 right now?
Well, I despair slightly if I'm honest on this one. I think HS2, it's about connectivity. I'm very passionate about connectivity. It's about connecting all parts of the UK. We talk about digital inclusion. That's both mobile and physical connectivity. I think equally, as a country, big infrastructure projects are important and they need to be seen with that long-term perspective. I suppose my fear at the moment is it's politics is short-term in its nature, and that clashes against these big infrastructure projects. And again, we're looking at the energy infrastructure that needs to be upgraded, the transport infrastructure that needs to be upgraded. Mobile, again, very, very important. And just going back to that, I know, it is a great thing I've said to people is, what's the difference between a bus stop and a mobile? A bus stop connects local people. It connects you to your job and area, travel to work areas. Mobile does that as well. Yeah,
no. But I suppose the problem is, like big infrastructure, transport infrastructure projects, I suppose mobile telephony, mobile connectivity, people expect it to be there. They don't really think, and they shouldn't really have to think too much about what's behind it. Similarly with railways, they shouldn't have to think too much about what makes that train turn up on time. But I suppose politically, infrastructure has got a pretty bad reputation right now for costing too much, delivering too little. I mean, how can professionals like you, help change that kind of that image?
Well, I'd certainly say we, as the mobile industry, I think we're very much getting on with it very, very quickly and very rapidly. And I think, where we're looking for is assistance at that local level to continue to carry out that pace. I think, big politically influenced projects tend to have these issues. And we've seen a bit of that with, planning a mobile. But, we need to work together, industry, government, local authorities and people. And again, it's one of the reasons why that Live Better Connected campaign is important. It's about opening up why this is a necessity.
Okay, well, of course, mobile goes beyond having a phone signal. We're post-pandemic. We're all now used to paying things with our cards, in shops, in markets. In fact, I think you've been involved recently in helping a campaign to help big issue sellers, homeless who sell magazines, access card payments, because, of course, they don't typically have that kind of technology or infrastructure around them. I mean, what's it all about? I mean, where are the challenges that you see about really extending this kind of accessibility?
Yeah, well, I've been fascinated to chat to the big issue because the pandemic changed things for everyone, and big issue sellers relied on people paying with cash for the magazine or donating money that way. The pandemic, when suddenly cash was you couldn't use cash, you were encouraged not to use, and this decimated the sort of ability for people to take those donations. But mobile stepped in. Now what you see is big issue sellers have been issued with mobile payment receivers, so you can pay with your mobile phone and with your debit card or credit card. And some of the stats that they were telling me is for instance, 35% greater sales because of having this. Yeah. It's because of the convenience. It's because of the trust that comes with it. I'm handing that money over. I know it's going somewhere. And equally on the side of those big issue sellers, they can take that money. They haven't got necessarily cash on them. So again, it's a more safer way of taking money. And it engages with some of the really interesting things was the human engagement that it brought. So so I just it's a fascinating example of where mobile again sits in areas where you wouldn't necessarily think it does, but again it permeates all society, and it's that invisible signal again is a really important one, but do have the physical infrastructure behind it as well that we need to build.
Okay. Well, finally, I mean, digital connectivity is critical, as we said. With mobile technologies continuously evolving, I suppose we need to keep up with that. I mean, how do we ensure that the installation and commissioning of these vital new infrastructure assets remains top of the UK's agenda?
Well, it's your blog here is perfect for this. I mean, we obviously engage with national, local, and devolved governments and politicians. We want to work with all gamuts of society. So again, the campaign we're doing, there is the element of the political side of things, but there's also that raising awareness with people and councillors and councils and equally all sections. We've talked about digital inclusion. It's about working with charities. This is again, it's a foundational requirement of today's modern world, and getting people comfortable with it is important. And why is that mast at the end of my street? What is it doing? How do I benefit from it? That's a message we really want to put out. So we've got now an interactive landscape as part of the Live Better Connected campaign. Really encourage people to try that. It lets you go into different parts, so a rural, a suburban, an urban area, and an industrial area, and you can pop up and see all the kind of things where mobile connects people and things and machines. Mm-hmm. But you can also then peel all that back and then have a look at the infrastructure that's there, the monopoles, the rooftop installations, the small cells, the base stations. It's an exciting way to look at it, but again, it's about building that so people are comfortable with it, and equally, as people use, more and more, the kind of way people use these devices today, and not just your mobile phone, is phenomenal. I think a major country has just said, for instance, the industrial 4G is a key part of their tenet of their policy going forward. We want to see the UK government doing that. We want to see the UK as a place for world-class connectivity. That means building out these mobile 4G, 5G and 5G standalone and beyond as part of the gamut of our connectivity. Okay.
So success, I mean, apart from success, being me having a telephone signal outside my house, notwithstanding that important matter, what does success look like to you?
Success to me is as I say, being able to build these networks as quickly as possible, and to enable as many people to access them. Working with government as well to identify those areas where it's economically difficult, and to look at where the public-private partnership can come in. So again, an example of that is the shared rural network, which is extending that out, and equally ensuring that the investment environment in the UK is a positive place for us to bring in that investment and get those networks out as quickly as possible. We as Mobile UK, it's very much our job, and very, these kind of forums are fantastic for that. And we do really hope to continue the success rate of the industry as it is, because it is a fast moving industry, changing technology, and watching how people use this as well. The changing world is amazing.
Gareth, thanks so much for explaining to me. I feel a lot more educated about what my G's are all about now. So thanks very much for joining me on the podcast. And I hope that everyone does go and living better connected and take the challenge and see where they are on the spectrum. So thanks, Gareth. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gareth. As I said, that's all we've got time for today. I'll put a link to that test and the most recent reports on the show notes, so do take a look at those. But that's all we've got time for today on the Infrastructure Podcast. We have got more in the pipeline and more guests to talk to as we continue to probe the big issues faced across the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the new Infrastructure Podcast website at www.infrastructure-podcast.com. You'll find background information to this show and also all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share with your colleagues. So thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Gareth, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.